Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and it's time to review some cards from Knights of the Frozen Throne. That's right, the new Hearthstone expansion has been revealed, and as you can see right behind me with this key art, there are going to be some Knights of the Frozen Throne. That's right, heroes, in fact. The Hearthstone heroes that we know and love are going to be turning into Death Knights, and that's going to be a pretty big mechanic in the new expansion with these new hero Death Knight cards, of which we'll review the first one in this very video alongside 4 other cards, including yet another legendary. Before I jump into these reviews though, I do want to give you a little tip. I'm going to be talking about these cards at great length. There's going to be a lot of discussion for each individual card. If you're just looking for my overall take, at the end of the video I did go through each card really quickly and rate them from 1 to 5 stars, just as an overall measure of how good I think they're going to be. You can find a link to that spot in the video in the description below. But for those of you who do want to hear my entire review and all the details that I have to offer for these cards, let's go ahead and jump into them, starting off with the first new legendary. Up first is Deathstalker Rexxar, one of the new hero type cards that I mentioned earlier. These are new cards that essentially, when you play them, they will replace your hero and give you a new hero power. And I think, as advertised, they'll all give you some amount of armor as well, and probably have some sort of instant battle cry effect like Deathstalker Rexxar here. But one important thing to note is that this is not a minion. Unlike Lord Jaraxxus, which you would play and replaces your hero in that same sort of mechanic, Lord Jaraxxus is actually a minion. This is an entirely new type of card, as you can probably tell from the shape of the card and the shape of the artwork there. So we've had spells, we've had minions, we've had weapons in the past. This adds a 4th type of card, I guess a hero card, as it's been called so far. And that's an important distinction because of things like Dirty Rat, for instance, which will pull a Lord Jaraxxus out of your hand, or secrets like Repentance or Mirror Entity, which interact with a Lord Jaraxxus when you play it. That will not happen with these new hero cards. They are not minions, so those card interactions won't exist. These are much safer cards, essentially, to keep in your hand against sort of counterable plays like that. So these are much more reliable and consistent. As far as Deathstalker Rexxar himself is concerned, let's talk about this card. So it's a 6-mana card. When you play it, it does an instant thing. It has a battle cry that does 2 damage to all enemy minions. So, you know, the closest thing is probably Blizzard, a 6-mana spell that does 2 damage. Now, clearly this one doesn't freeze, so it's a little bit worse than Blizzard in that regard. But, of course, it's also giving you 5 extra armor to work with. So, you know, kind of a similar thing, a little bit of a stall mechanic, a stabilization mechanic to give yourself some time and react to the board when you play this card. And essentially, when you turn into Rexxar, you're going to keep the same health total. It's not like Jaraxxus or Ragnaros where it reduces your health. You just gain 5 armor on top of that. And primarily, you get a new hero power, which, as you can see here, is called Build a Beast. And with that hero power, it's going to allow you to craft a custom Zom Beast, which, first off, is the funniest name ever. But essentially what that means is you're going to get a discover effect whenever you hit the hero power button. It's going to pop up 3 beasts, a hunter beast and neutral beasts, and we've already been told that these are going to appear at the same regularity, so you're just as likely to get neutral beasts as you are hunter beasts, which is not typically the case with discover cards, so that's a little bit of a tweak. So neutral beasts are going to show up more than you might expect with a traditional discover effect. But anyway, you're going to pick 1 beast out of the first discover pool of 3 cards, and then another discover pool is going to pop up, sort of like with Kazakis, where when you build your potion, and you're going to get a second beast. And then once you've selected both beasts, they're going to fuse together into a single card called Zom Beast. It's always going to be called Zom Beast. I think it probably just uses the artwork of the first card that you pick. And then essentially, that's going to combine their mana cost, it's going to combine their stats, and it's going to combine their effects. So if you pick Stone Tusk Boar as your first selection, and you pick, let's say, Bloodfin Raptor as your second selection, you're going to get a 4/3 charging Zombeast. Okay, and it's going to cost you 3 mana, because you take the mana cost of Bloodfin and Stone Tusk, that's 3 mana. You merge their attacks together, that's 4. Their health together is 3. And it has charge because Stone Tusk Boar has charge. So you can already, your mind is probably going crazy with all the different beast combinations that are possible. And there are a ton, and some of them are crazy, but there have actually already been a few conditions for this hero power mentioned by the developers. Shortly after this was announced, there will be no beasts available higher than 5 mana. That's so that you can't build a Zombeast that costs more than 10 mana. So you can't put 2 Savannah Highmanes together to get to 12 mana and make an unplayable card. So their kind of rule there is all of the beast options are going to be 5 mana or less, so that the max mana card you can create is 10 mana. And of course that removes a lot of different beasts from the equation, like King Crush. There's a pretty crazy combination if that wasn't the case, where you could do King Crush and Young Dragonhawk and get a charging 9/9 at 10 mana Wind Fury 18 damage single turn OTK combo going. But that's out of the picture. That's not going to happen. 5 mana is the cap. You're not even going to get like a charging Savannah Highmane that's a 7/6 with Stone Tusk Boar. Those kinds of crazy plays don't exist. Although there are still some pretty crazy plays. Imagine Dispatch Kodo with Stubborn Gastropod, right? If you give Dispatch Kodo Poisonous, his Battlecry effect, where he does damage, is going to kill any minion. It's poisonous. It will kill them. It doesn't matter how much damage it does. It's just going to be an instant kill. So it becomes like a cheap Vile Spine Slayer with actually slightly better stats. So, and actually the same cost. No, it's, I guess, 1 mana more than Vile Spine Player, but doesn't require combo either. So there's that kind of crazy combo. I mean, just little stuff like River Crocolisk plus Silverback Patriarch would be a really nice combo too, because it's just an efficient taunt minion, basically. You're getting 4/7 in stats if you combine, 3/7 in stats if you combine those 2 minions and you give it taunt, and it only costs 5 mana. That's not a bad card. That's better than average, probably. That's a decent vanilla looking card. And there's a lot more combinations than that. With Tundra Rhino and with Stone Tusk Boar giving charge options, there's all kinds of charge shenanigans that can happen. There's just good Death Rattle minions out there, good Death Rattle effects. So you're going to be able to build good beasts, and on average it looks like those beasts are going to be much, much better than just a normal card at the same cost. Just because it turns out when you take universal keywords like charge and you combine them with stats on beasts and other effects on beasts, some crazy things can happen. There are probably going to be some slight consistency issues. In other words, you're not going to be able to predict or control exactly what you need every time. You might not always get a taunt minion if that's what you really need, so that's an issue. But ultimately, it looks like Zombeasts are going to be really strong and, of course, insanely cool. But the greater question than that is whether or not Deathstalker Rexxar is actually fast enough to see play. Because with a lot of cards like this, they're usually just too slow, and we've never really seen Control Hunter take off as an archetype. There haven't yet been enough supporting cards to make Control Hunter a really big, important part of the meta. Deathstalker Rexxar, so he'll have to kind of do it on his own, right? Unless there are other pieces released, of course, in Knights of the Frozen Throne to support that archetype. It looks like this card's going to have to carry the weight all on its own. And clearly, this is a pretty slow play. You have to spend 8 mana before you ever really see a Zombeast. And even then, you have to spend the mana on the Zombeast too. So it takes a long time to get that recurring value off of Build-A-Beast. And you have to spend 2 mana every time as well. So what Build-A-Beast really starts to look like is Life Tap, the Warlock hero power. You're spending 2 mana to draw a card. But thankfully, the card you're drawing is not coming out of your deck. It's being generated, and it's probably better than the average card too. So it's this really powerful late game win condition where you're just generating infinite resources and really good minions on demand, and you're controlling their mana cost so you can still play regular cards alongside them as well. And it looks to me like Build-A-Beast will be a great control win condition that'll be really, really difficult for most decks to beat. The problem is getting there. Can you survive that long? Can you sacrifice a turn or 2 of tempo to set up your Build-A-Beasts? Can you survive in the meantime? Clearly, Deathstalker Rexxar itself as a card is designed to sort of stall and stabilize, because you're dealing with your opponent's board, You're adding some additional health. But then from that point, can you ever really recover? Can you make zombies that are swing-style cards that reverse a board back in your favor, that help you develop and resist your opponent's onslaught of minions and damage? And I'm not sure that you'll be able to. Ultimately, I think cards like this that play the really long-term value game with things like Lakkari Sacrifice just last expansion, right? We all got caught on the crazy infinite value. We thought it was going to be a good deck, but ultimately it just ended up taking too much mana and being too slow. I don't think Deathstalker Rexxar is quite as bad as Lakkari Sacrifice in that regard. Because of this battle cry, it does have some instant impact on the board. And I actually do think the payoff is probably even a little better than Lakkari Sacrifice, because you're going to get more than just 3/2s. Even though those are free, you're just going to get higher impact charge and battle cry style minions that impact the board sooner. So I think that you'll be able to stabilize a little better, but still, maybe it just won't make the cut. Hearthstone, at the end of the day, always boils down to being really, really aggressive, and it's going to be tough for this card to make a spot. But all that said, I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see it. This idea and this mechanic is insanely cool and sounds like a ton of fun, and it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of zombies we actually can come up with. And of course, new beasts that are added to the set are going to totally change that as well. And in wild format, I can't even begin to imagine all the implications that this has, because there's just a so much bigger beast pool to actually pull from. This looks like it's going to be just a ton of fun. So hopefully, and maybe, it's good enough. If the meta slows down enough, this card will be really, really good. Otherwise, I think people will try to make it work, and it will be okay. I don't think it will be meta-defining or a Tier 1 deck, but it might be one of those Tier 2 or Tier 3 edge decks that's a lot of fun to play and can still win you a lot of games. Alright, now that I said like a bajillion words about Deathstalker Rexxar, let's talk about the next card. This one I won't have nearly so much to say about. This is just a neutral rare minion called the Shallow Gravedigger. It's a 3-mana 3/1 with the Death Rattle that adds a random Death Rattle minion to your hand. So this is sort of the web spinner of the new era. Clearly considerably more expensive than web spinner. The stats, honestly, aren't very good compared to web spinners, because of course a 1-mana 1/1 is much more efficient than a 3-mana 3/1. This dies incredibly easily to a lot of things, so it just feels like fodder you kind of toss onto the board. It does have a really nice Death Rattle effect, because we've seen a lot of 3-mana cards underestimated when they generate an additional card for you, things like Stonehill Defender, of course. The problem, of course, with Shallow Gravedigger compared to something like Stonehill Defender, though, is that first off, the stat orientation's backwards with Stonehill Defender. It doesn't have taunt like Stonehill Defender, and you don't get to pick which card you get like you do with Stonehill Defender. So clearly this is not the most fair comparison ever, but you can see why a card like this has a lot more downsides than a card like Stonehill Defender, which was really the surprise of Unguro and has been one of the best cards in the set. This one's much more reliant on randomness. It looks like there's going to be weak Death Rattles added into the game, like Shallow Gravedigger. You probably don't want to cycle your Shallow Gravedigger into your Shallow Gravedigger. That's not a high value return kind of play. Maybe if there's a ton of good Death Rattles, this gets a little bit better. But ultimately, I just don't think this offers enough as far as early game board presence is concerned. It's just going to die to so many tokens. It takes a long time for it to pass any value back, because you have to spend the mana on the new Death Rattle card you get. So I don't really think this will even make the cut in maybe hyper-aggressive Death Rattle decks if those were to become a thing. It still feels like this one wouldn't be good enough at actually contributing to the board. And at the end of the day, too unreliable and too weak as far as a tempo play is concerned to ever really see play, in my opinion. Moving on to the third card in this review, it is the Paladin minion Chillblade Champion, which introduces another new keyword from the set, which is lifesteal. And essentially, this is not really new. What that means is anytime this minion does damage, that same amount of damage is healed to your hero. The exact same thing we've seen with Wickerflame Burn Bristle. I think it was Mistress of Pain way back in the day, an old card that's rotated out, which doesn't probably see a lot of play even in Wild these days, I'm not sure. But both of those have had the same effect in the past. It just wasn't called anything, but now it's being called Lifesteal. And in fact, Ben Brode has already confirmed on Twitter that Wickerflame Burn Bristle should in fact be getting the life steal keyword, so those things will match up in the future. But as far as this card is concerned, it's actually kind of interesting, isn't it? A 4-mana 3/2 is comparable to things perhaps like Horcrux Elite, which is a 4-mana 4/3 with charge, so you're sort of sacrificing 1/1 in stats to get the lifesteal here. You could also look at a thing like Wolf Rider, which is a 3-mana 3/1, so you're kind of paying 1 mana to get an additional health and lifesteal. And when I put it in the vein of those two cards, it actually feels fairly equitable. It feels close to those, and frankly, both of those are playable cards. Even Wolf Rider, although not played a ton, obviously, does tend to show up from time to time just as a cheap, aggressive kind of card. But Chillblade Champion probably wouldn't be used for aggression's sake. I think he's used more for stabilization's sake. So maybe you could compare this card more to something like a Bash we've seen in Warrior that does 3 damage and presumably heals 3 damage. It's a little bit more expensive than Bash, but it also has more flexibility than Bash. Bash is a one-time thing, whereas Chillblade Champion, sometimes you can just play him on an empty board for 4 mana and get the 3 free heal, and he's still around as a 3/2 body as well. The question is, can this guy synergize enough with Paladin buffs to really make the heals count? Because ultimately, I don't know that doing 3 damage and healing 3 health is a swingy enough kind of play to make it worth running this card in your deck and sacrificing that spot in your deck for a more powerful kind of play. But if this works well enough with buffs, if you hit the Blessing of Kings on this as an 8-mana 7/6 charger that also happens to heal you for 7 health, that starts to look like a much better play. So it probably just has to find the right kind of deck and the right kind of scenario where it can just sit on a board uncontested or combo out in the late game as a nice little heal and trade kind of card. So maybe it's a 7/6 that trades into a 5/5, gives you a heal, leaves a bit of a threatening body on the board. But that does take a lot of time to build up those resources in your hand. Of course, Paladin is good in a control environment. So I feel like this could probably find a niche somewhere, some little deck that makes sense with Chillblade Champion. All the pieces for this to be good are there, and frankly, just charge cards in general have historically been very good and even often overtuned and a little bit too powerful, particularly if they have any sort of upside, as does this one. So I suspect this card will actually eventually see some play in some kind of deck or another. I don't know that it's going to be deck defining or that there will be a lifesteal Paladin, but just given all the synergies, it makes a lot of sense. The one big risk here, though, I think, is that Paladin already has so many good cards at the 4-mana spot. Things like Consecration, True Silver Champion, Blessing of Kings that we already mentioned, any neutral 4-mana minions that they want to run, like Gentle Megasaur currently is a pretty popular one. It's just going to be crowded, so it's going to have to find some way to really carve out at that spot and make a name for itself compared to all those other cards, which might just be too big of a challenge for it to overcome. But we'll see. I think the pieces are there for this one to certainly work and do something cool. So let's move on to the next card. This time it's a priest card by the name of Spirit Lash. This is a 2-mana spell. It also utilizes the Life Steal keyword, but this time it's on a spell, so any damage this spell does will restore health to your hero. And that's actually pretty cool, because this does 1 damage to all minions, so it's a whirlwind effect, but for only 1 extra mana compared to Whirlwind, you're getting essentially what could be a fairly sizable heal. Because if you just think, 3 or 4 minions out there, it's suddenly a Whirlwind that heals for 4. A 2-mana heal 4, not terrible. There's things like Holy Light in the game. Plus, of course, you're removing all that junk from the board. Against aggressive token-style decks, a card like this becomes very scary. Maelstrom Portal, for instance, fantastic card already. Whirlwind, great card already. This fits in the realm of those cards. Plus, for a priest who's typically going to be a more control-style deck, that's always looking to stabilize, that's always looking to draw the game out and live a little bit longer, any little free heals they can gather along the course of the game become much, much better. There's also some implications here with spell damage. If you get some spell damage and this is a deal 2 or a deal 3, it's a lot more healing coming in without any additional cost necessarily. So that's one little extra synergy we could look for. And then I think the biggest implication here is cards like Northshire Cleric and Circle of Healing. We've already seen throughout the history of Hearthstone the Wild Pyromancer deal damage to the entire board, and then Circle of Healing to draw a bajillion cards with Northshire Cleric. This essentially allows you to do the same kind of thing, but with perhaps a tad more flexibility than Wild Pyromancer. So this can be used on its own when you don't have a spell for your Wild Pyromancer. You don't necessarily have to commit a minion to the board if you don't want to. You just play it. It's just there. It does its thing. You can combo it out still with those other options to draw tons of cards if you want. There's all kinds of ways to use this. So I actually think this will be a nice little piece of the toolkit for Priest. So let's move on to the fifth and final card for this review. It's actually a new neutral legendary minion called Prince Keleseth. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with a really interesting battle cry here. If your deck has no 2-cost cards, other than this one presumably, so what's left in your deck, not at the beginning of the game, give all minions in your deck +1/+1. So this is essentially another deck manipulation card like we've seen with Reno or Kazakis, where if you meet a condition with your deck, then this card will do something specific for you. So it's actually really cool. We've seen also the actual effect here with Mist Caller in the past, a Shaman card. If you played the Mist Caller, you'd get all your minions buffed +1/+1. That never took off. That card was pretty much a failure because it was way too slow. By the time you got to that 6 mana and you committed 6 mana to a fairly weak 4/4 body, that was just such a big commitment, and you fell so far behind in tempo over that turn and perhaps the next turn that the long-term value of the buff never really paid off. But with Prince Keleseth, you get to do it early. There's going to be times you see this in your mulligan, you're like, ooh, free Keleseth. You play it right on 2. It's got reasonable stats for a 2-drop as is. You can play 2-mana 2/2s in this game. And then you're getting that value back for the rest of the game very, very early. So the stats start to add up and pile up really quickly. And we've never seen a deck really take advantage of that. Hand buff style decks have kind of done that, and anytime you've seen those hand buff decks really start rolling and hitting the buffs early, and they start to play everything that's slightly better, it often overwhelms you more quickly than you'd think. So I think Prince Keleseth could do the same thing, plus it's just inevitable. It's going to keep happening. It's going to keep happening. The real risk, though, is running this in your deck is problematic because you have to sacrifice quite a bit. You're giving up all 2-cost cards. So I think it's going to take the right class and the right kind of deck to make this work. In other words, classes which really don't like using their hero power on turn 2 because it doesn't impact the board. Say things like Warrior or sometimes Priest or Hunter, which all have a sort of more late game value type hero powers, and they just have a dead hero power on turn 2. This kind of card and a deck built around it could really leave them in a rough spot where they never have a turn 2 play unless they get Prince Keleseth exactly in their opening hand. But for classes like Paladin or Shaman, Warlock in particular, who loves to typically hero power on turn 2, maybe Mage, those kinds of classes that can do something against... Oh, Rogue. Rogue is one I should absolutely mention because Rogue loves to pull up their weapon on turn 2. Those classes who can build up or bank some sort of value of their hero power consistently would probably be more okay to say, yeah, let's toss in a Prince Keleseth. That way we can really reap the benefits of this guy when we draw him, but we're not sacrificing that much in the meantime. If he's sitting at the bottom of our deck, we can still use our turn 2 pretty effectively, and on future turns when we need to fill in that 2-mana gap at any given point, our hero power is going to do something useful regardless. So it's okay if our deck's a little bit less flexible or a little bit less smooth when a mana curve is concerned. And then occasionally this guy's just going to give you a crazy win condition in your opening hand, and he's going to power you above decks and help you climb up the ladder really quickly. And then, you know, he's only a minor downside the rest of the time. So it's probably deck dependent and class dependent. I think it's probably not perfect even in aggro decks. Maybe mid-range decks get the most value out of Prince Keleseth, because I think aggro decks even, they need the more consistent curve. So yeah, the stats would pile up really quickly, but they may not have enough draw to keep refilling and taking advantage, plus sacrificing your turn 2 for a merely mediocre play as a 2-mana 2/2. is probably just a little bit too slow for what an aggro deck is really trying to hammer home some pressure and get those early consistent wins that they're so good at accomplishing. So I think Prince Keleseth is going to be best in mid-range decks where it really starts to roll up at turns like 4, 5, 6, 7, and it just becomes an overwhelming amount of pressure that opponents run out of gas to beat. In control decks, it may not help enough, because if you're going control, you probably already have a ton of big bodies, and the stat gain per minion is going to be a much smaller percentage of the minion's total original stats, and it's going to be more reliant on effects than stats and bodies. So it looks like this could be a cool mid-range card in classes like Rogue and Shaman and Paladin in particularly. I think those would make the most sense for this kind of card as far as I see it. That said, who knows if it's actually any good. I think we got to see it in practice. It might just be too compromising as far as the deck is concerned. But I think it has some promise. I don't think it's a terrible card by any means. I think a lot of people are going to say it's terrible. I haven't really read any thoughts or reviews yet. I like to do these things fresh. But I don't actually think it will be. Maybe other people think it's good too. I'm not sure. But I have a feeling this is going to be one of those cards that's kind of sleeper okay. Probably not meta-defining, but is going to do work in a deck or two here or there. So to close this video, I actually want to rate each of these cards on a 1 to 5 star scale. And what that means is 1-star cards are the kind of cards that just won't ever be played. 5-star cards are going to be the very best cards of the set that are deck and meta defining. And 3-star cards are essentially cards that might see some niche play here and there. They show up from time to time. 2-star cards would be incredibly rare to see. 4-star cards are going to be important parts of a lot of different decks, but not sort of the all-stars of the set. Let's go ahead and jump into these ratings, starting off with Deathstalker Rexxar. I think this is a 3-star card. I think Shallow Gravedigger is a 1-star card. I think Chillblade Champion is a 2-star card. I think Spirit Lash is a 4-star card, and I think Prince Keleseth is a 3-star card. So all of that said, guys, I want to hear what your take on these cards is. Are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? What rating would you give each of these cards on a 1 to 5 star scale? Because as you know, I often get it wrong, and I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts so I know what's good too. All that said, leave those thoughts, leave your reviews in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.